Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here for this dialogue with the authors. And this is hosted by the Taos Institute. I'm Alex Arnold. I'm the executive consultant for the Taos Institute. And I'm very pleased to be here today with this small group to talk about inspiring stories of appreciative inquiry used in the health and care systems. And thank you all for joining us. So I will introduce our hosts today and then quickly pass it on to them so we can get started. So we are here with Suzanne Quinney, Tim Slack, Kayleigh Barnett, and Daniel Hodgkiss. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Well, yeah, the recording's gone. If you want to put the slides up.
Yep.
And it might be nice, as we're just so small, actually, while you're doing that, because Sheila and Matthew and Carol, you don't all know each other. No, I know everyone. So maybe just take a moment to either unmute and just say where you are, and or put it in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I'll start then. So I'm Sheila Aitken, and I'm the managing editor of AI Practitioner. So I've known Suzanne and Tim in that regard for quite a long time, and Alex as well, actually. The reason, well, one of the reasons that I'm on this call, first of all, it's interesting. It's something that I know that Suzanne and Tim have been working with for years, and I've been vaguely keeping track of it. But the other reason is that we reviewed this book in particular. We had a reviewer for this book, and we've also, Kayleigh, I haven't met you, but I did read some of your contributions work on with you on some of the contributions for AI Practitioner. So thank you. And Carol, we talked about one that you might be writing. So those are my connections. And you already know that I'm in France between tail ends of the hurricanes.
That's lovely. Thank you. Carol, go ahead, and then Matthew.
Okay, my name is Carol Strachan, and I know Suzanne and Tim from they're coming over to Belfast, which is where I am based, and doing appreciative inquiry training for the Educational Psychology Service, which I used to work for. And I have recently resigned from there, and I'm setting up privately now, and hoping to do a bit of appreciative inquiry training as well. So I'm also then writing an article. She was helping me with that. So I'm really interested to hear how the book's gone. I've read it. It's fascinating. I think it's a great read. It's really practical and really accessible, but really interested to hear more. Thank
you. Yeah, thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Meze. I'm the community manager for something called the Q Community, which is a kind of UK and Ireland-wide network of people involved in quality improvement. And my connection into this, I guess, is that within that community of 6,000 people, we had a little group around learning from excellence, or maybe it was a couple of hundred people in the end, or something like that. And I guess the connection between AI and learning from excellence became more obvious, and some of the learning from excellence meetings and things became kind of AI focused. And now actually we've got a kind of an offshoot group on AI, and one way or another, I don't know, it's kind of slightly clicked more for me because I think naively I just thought AI was kind of summits, or I just thought it was big 3 days. I don't know. I kind of had a misunderstanding. I'm now realizing, and I'm planning to organise a little positive journaling or whatever thing within Q, maybe because you just mentioned people and go, I'd love to try that for a few weeks as an experiment and then feed back together, because that's what we had something a couple of weeks ago where that came out in one of the meetings. I just thought, well, that's a great thing to try. Now I've understood that it's not all summits and stuff. Sorry to be so confused about the situation, but yeah, that's me, Q Community, and helping those people that are involved in AI to kind of come together.
Thank you. That's lovely. And Teresa, don't feel you have to, but as we were a small group, we were just introducing ourselves. Or if you'd like to put something in the chat, that would be lovely. And while you're pondering what you'd like to do, can you move the next slide, Alex? And
can you hear me?
Of course you can. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
All right. I'm Teresa Bertram, and I'm the CEO of a system of facilities that provide services, housing, and care for older people. I've been an AI practitioner since 1995, as well as a member of the Taos Institute. Many years. I use appreciative inquiry in almost all that I do, whether it's leadership development, working with the board, or leading the organization. And since my work touches on health and care, I thought I'd learn what the author's work was about. Also, I'm having a series of technology issues. So I'm joining you by phone, but our area is having fluctuations with internet and phone coverage. So if I'm in and out, please excuse.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to have you here. Great to hear about your connections with health and care. Okay, just one brief moment on the first slide. Because it's the Taos Institute, I thought I'd put that one of Tim in. Poetically, this is his latest. She's completely bonded with Tim, our new dog Gladys. So yeah, next slide, Alex. This I was going to suggest, if you'd like to do this in the chat to get you going, if you could sum up your life in 5 words. Actually, you could do it with 3 if you want to, but why don't you all put 3 in the chat that you think are speaking to you? I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. I've done mine. There's mine. Tim, what about you?
You've got fun, challenge, and
I like yours, Matthew. Just questions.
Fun, challenge, curiosity. That's it.
Thank you. Anyway, while you're doing that, and next slide, Alex. Oh, lovely, Alex. That's nice. So, Tim, do you want to say a little bit? Maybe Tim and Dan could say a little bit about this is the beginnings of the book.
I think I'll just tell, like all these things in Appreciative Inquiry, is about narrative, and this is with the start of the story. We were, Dan and us, a few of us were at the Appreciative Inquiry conference in Nice, and before the pandemic, and one of the key points of the week was a presentation by Suzanne and colleagues from NHS about this program called Learning from Excellence, which we'll share a bit more about later on. And at that conference, Dan and I were standing together thinking, we've got a whole series of practice emerging from the NHS in England and Scotland and Wales. And we've got some amazing examples, not just learning from excellence, but we've been training with Dan and others, our partners above, for a number of years. And they said, we need to write this up. We need to share this experience. So that was the idea. It took us 5 years to do because of a pandemic got in the way. But actually, the pandemic also showed some brilliant examples of work. And the book is really the summation of a number of practitioners all over UK bringing together their practice. And we planned one book and realized that as the project developed, we needed a supplement. So there's actually 2 books now, which is really the case studies, all the practice. And that's the story of the book, really. And we were also determined with the partners, particularly Kayleigh and Dan, was not just to be about hospitals or primary care, but also about care homes. Because there was particular work in the West Midlands where Dan's based, where that was key work been emerging in quite challenging circumstances. We'll say more about the book later, but one thing I would say about it, having been involved with the writing of it, is that actually so many of the case studies and examples are working in very challenging circumstances, in difficult matters like governance or hospital crises in terms of patients and the COVID pandemic as well. So it's come from a real challenging set of circumstances, which I think makes the book. Well, I'm so overwhelmed by the sheer quality of the practitioners who actually contributed to it. Dan, do you want to answer that now?
Yeah, Dan, do you want to add anything to that? And we'll move on to the next slide as well, Alex, while Dan does that.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Tim on everything there. The only thing I'd add to that is that the book really brings to life that use of quality improvement with human factors and appreciative inquiry together. And it's the first space where we've had that opportunity to do that. So in health and social care, we tend to see, the terms like psychological safety or human factors or quality improvement or appreciative inquiry, all are separate things. And actually, they're so much better when they're all done together. And actually, when you look at the book, I think it gives a real richness to the fact that for too long we've been talking about these approaches separate, when actually when they work together, you get something far more special. And that's what we get from the case studies, I believe. Yeah, so to carry on, I think obviously what I would say here is that we just need to remember that this is not the first of it. I think it's the first of its kind in the way it's written, but actually it's underpinned by some predecessors, if you like. So building on the best was the introduction to appreciative inquiry in healthcare, and that was 2006. So actually a rich history there, near on 20 years at this point, that actually we were having conversations about how we move healthcare to an asset-based approach. And that was very quickly followed then by appreciative inquiry in healthcare, those positive questions in 2011, bringing out the best. And actually, that's what we're all here for. How do we bring the best out? How do we give the best to our patients? But actually still, we're still having conversations about productivity versus improvement massively in the NHS or in healthcare more generally. And then underpinned by that, appreciative leadership. And I think this is the one actually that delivering the difference for a conversation or an inquiry. That's absolutely where, we get the best in health and social care. And I think, those conversations at all levels of an organization, really recognizing and collaborating and partnering together, we did in the healthcare at the minute. So we've just had a new government, and obviously we've just had a massive review of healthcare by Lord Darcy. And Darcy's first point in his review is that we need to reconnect and re-engage with people and staff. And how lovely is that in a national review, the very first thing is about connectivity and engagement. And I think that, our humble predecessors and ancestors in this world all reference that connectivity, that engagement, as does appreciating health and care. So just a real mention of those at this point. But next slide, please, Alex. I'm sorry to hear that, Carol. Hopefully that you can get internet sorted in the background and that you can be part of the conversation. So this was a piece of work as an image by somebody in the UK called Sonia Sparkles. And she does a whole plethora of these images that really tries to capture these real complex parts of health and social care. And in this image, obviously, appreciative inquiry, and really simplify that, really make it grounded for those that are brand new to this. And actually, we see here, this very essence of appreciative inquiry giving life. If we don't nurture the plant, that it will die, those setbacks, that poor practice, etc. And we can akin this to not just health and social care, but equally any profession, that we need to nurture things. We need to give it the right nutrients. We need to regenerate our practice so that we grow even more of those flowers. And that's what I think we're trying to do in health and social care. And there's a real movement now in the UK. And I think actually lots of other countries are looking at the UK now going, actually, what is happening in healthcare there? In one sense, a lot of talk about productivity, but in another, absolutely some real bright spots of emergence, these islands of brilliance. And actually, how do we then come to make these islands nurtured so that they actually become the whole island? Next slide, please. And here, Alex Grant talks about the work around what makes an expert against what makes an explorer. And actually, isn't our job to explore? Because clearly none of us have all the answers. The expert feels that they do. And sometimes then that might drift us into that sort of groupthink and thinking, going down a certain approach to make decisions with that sort of expertise and conviction. But actually, isn't it far more special where we talk about humility, where we allow ourselves to be vulnerable or doubtful in our approach to decision making? And in somewhat making ourselves vulnerable in health and social care, being curious and brave is a real conversation that's happening at the minute. So our National Director for Patient Safety is reviewing our next strategy for next year as a long-term patient safety strategy. And the very first thing he said at a national conference only a couple of 3 weeks ago was that we need to be much more curious in our thinking, that we need to absolutely discover excellence far more. So I think even the people we see as experts actually unearth themselves as explorers. And I'd really like, if anything comes from this, that actually we deploy a community of explorers rather than experts who kind of try and work themselves into that sort of pure validation, evidence-based approach. Of course, we need some evidence, but we can do that more humbly. We can do that more curiously, and we can come together then to discover. And again, I think it goes back to the point about collaboration and working together, that we discover far more when we get far more lenses to that. And that's where Adam Grant was going around that explorative approach. And that absolutely lends itself to the inquiry word of appreciative inquiry, that we inquire into, we look into something and discover. Next slide, please, Alex. And obviously, we're joined here by, an editor of the II Practitioner, and we give thanks to you for that, because in the September edition, it starts to review appreciating health and care, and that's brilliant actually, because we want this work to land not just in the UK but everywhere. This is something that we can absolutely see as a toolkit that not just applies to health and care, even though the case studies are very centered around that. I think the resource gives us a real opportunity of underpinning principles in all of our work that helps us to look beyond how we do things with visions and missions, or how we bring staff together in terms of professional development, or getting the best out of somebody within our team. So thank you so much for reviewing Appreciating Health and Care as in the II Practitioner. Brilliant, actually, that we could be part of that, and hopefully that partnership continues on and we get more insights from as we move forwards. Because I think one of the conversations that all of us as authors had was actually we had so many case studies come through, but we knew that that was not all. And actually what I see since the book has been published is that so many other people have come to me with stories telling me of the brilliant work they're doing. So hopefully, we can dedicate at some point that whole II Practitioner to health and social care. Wouldn't that be brilliant, actually? Just moving forwards. But thank you for that support. Next slide, please.
Sheila, did you want to say something? I saw you unmuted.
I was kind of typing away in the chat, but what I was going to say is, in fact, it's just a real pleasure to uplift something that is so positive and so affirming. And also, it's not quite finished yet, because we will be having another story in the February issue. See, there's another one in the November issue, which hasn't been published yet. And we will have something related in the February issue as well. So we're really stringing the story out to get the maximum impact.
I think that's what we did as well with the book, that we strung it out over COVID, and actually it gave us a much better story, So yeah, I think the more we string it out, the more that develops and grows, actually. One of the features that you'll see as part of the resource was some work by Robin and Joan, actually, that look at the four lenses approach. And this was used in appreciative supervision and really trying to understand how we come into supervision, how we reframe in the moment with that opportunity that actually what we tend to see, they say, is four lenses. So we see that people might come to us with a lens of fear or the lens of being judged. And we've seen that traditionally in healthcare, where it's traditionally a deficit-based approach, that actually, whether an incident happens, very quickly, it becomes about fear and judgment. What we're seeing now as we move forward with what we call PSIF, so the Patient Safety Incident Response Framework, is that actually much more around that lens of curiosity, that lens of love and compassion, and how we come together not to blame an individual or invoke fear or judgment upon a person, but how we look at a system and actually how we understand the emotions of the people in a stretched system, a pressured environment that's actually operating quite often in that tragic use of appreciative inquiry, if we like, that they are so busy, they're burnt out, they're exhausted, but yet here they are still wanting to deliver the very best for every patient that they encounter. And actually, how do we protect our staff within that? How do we ask curious questions to staff so that they don't feel judged, that they don't fear, those conversations? So how do we have more curious conversations is absolutely one of the questions that's rife in the NHS at the minute and in social care. And equally, how do we have compassion for one another? Because we know actually, one of the things that we do within my own team is that we start with a temperature check. And I think this is absolutely about that lens of love and compassion. We ask everybody in our team to go around and sort of share with, and it's not a mandate, but ask them to share about how they are personally and professionally. Because then if we know somebody is really experiencing a number of different things at one time, at that point, we can form a compassionate circle around that person. We can really uplift that person and look to support them. So that's something that it features quite heavily in the book. And it was a piece of work that I supported with Tim. And we did a whole piece. So my title is one of the most negative in the NHS. It's called Managing Deterioration Lead. So I manage things that deteriorate, which is quite the opposite you would think of appreciative inquiry. It's horrible. But actually, within that, I've been able to elicit appreciative inquiry through and through and look at how we prevent deterioration, but by keeping people well. Because that's the reframe of deterioration. How do we keep people in the preferred place of care and we keep them well and thriving? And we use the four lenses in care homes, which was pretty special actually, where the care home managers started to say that at times they're judged by an ambulance service or by a GP or by other health professionals. And how do we prevent that? Well, we prevent it by coming together. So we can only shift the lens where we come collaboratively together and we stop the practice of what was going on and we shift. So I'm going to hand over at this point to one of my fellow authors, but we'll see as we go through. What we're trying to give here is just snippets or glimpses of some of the tools, some of the things in the books that we really see as powerful in health and care settings. So next slide, please, Alex.
Stan. So it feels a little bit like teaching my grandma how to suck eggs with some of the people on the call to talk about the kind of principles of appreciative inquiry, but it's always helpful to touch back and kind of realign ourselves with those principles. So I'll run through them very, very quickly, and then I'm going to pass over to Suzanne to do a little bit of a deep dive before I take you through some NHS versions or health and social care versions that we've come across. So obviously the constructionist principle is that idea that the words that we use create the worlds that we live in and help us to shape our perception and the way that we understand the world around us. So the words that we use being really, really important to get the kind of worlds that we want to see. The simultaneity principle, which I always struggle to say, tells us that those questions that we ask are fateful. And the moment that we start asking questions about things, then we start to see change immediately, because by asking a question, we encourage people to think differently. The anticipatory principle is the idea that new and inspiring images of the world are moved towards. So if we can start to make small changes that align with our vision of the future, then we can give people the ability to see themselves in that future and start to move towards that with more confidence. Excuse me, sorry. The poetic principle tells us that all of the situations that we see have an infinite number of things that we can explore, and that what we choose to focus on really makes a difference. So if we choose to focus on the kind of positively themed elements, then we will start to see more positivity around us. And then the positive principle tells us that our emotions influence what we do, or what we think in a situation. So if we can choose to have positive emotions, which obviously isn't always easy, but we can choose our emotions and how we react to a situation. So if we can choose to react positively, then we invite those positive changes as well. And then on the other side there, you've got the emergent principles, and I am considerably less comfortable talking about these because I tend to focus more on the original ones. But we've got the wholeness principle, and that's the idea that inclusivity builds that collective capacity and knowledge, and pooling our collective knowledge helps us to kind of create new opportunities. You've got the enactment principle that tells us that if we embody the change we wish to see, we can start to create a living kind of prototype of the ideal future. And I often refer to this when I talk about kind of role modeling in situations. If we allow people to see the way we want things to be, then people will naturally start to kind of follow that behavior. The narrative principle is kind of that idea that stories are transformative, and that we live in the narratives that we construct for ourselves. And we know, don't we, that story has been around before humans had language and art. We sat around campfires telling stories, and those stories are so important and so intrinsic to the way that we look at the world. And then we've got the free choice principle, which is that people are more committed when they've made a choice to be involved and how they want to be involved. So that it's much better to kind of allow people to engage in the way that, or encourage people to engage in the way that they want to engage, rather than prescriptively telling people how to get involved. And then that awareness principle is that we know that we have underlying biases, and we know that we have underlying assumptions, and helping to build awareness around that can help us to kind of create deeper conversations and relationships, and being able to recognize where our assumptions and our biases might be playing into things means that we can open those conversations up with people a little bit more. So I'm going to pass over to Suzanne to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the constructionist principle, given the group of people that we're on the call with.
And I would also like to acknowledge the Centre for AI, who produced this beautiful graphic and then gave me permission to put it in the book as well. And they do wonderful work. They're based in the States and produce great material. So thanks to them for that. Next slide, Alex. And this quote from Harleen Anderson, who's a Taos associate, we use it often, but it seems to me to sum up what's happening really when we're doing this appreciative inquiry, that we're creating and recreating our meanings and understandings, our realities and ourselves. And are we looking to enhance possibility? So thank you, Harleen, for that summary. Next slide. So this is a little bit into some of my deeper interests, but you know, the principle of holism. Am I saying the right thing? The whole. I often come back to the fact that we need to see the world and the planet as a whole, and I've found some beautiful work recently looking at this, where it highlights the fact that so much of our Western intellectual drive is based on this idea that we're fundamentally separate from the planet and from nature. And in that state of separation, a lot of very bad things happen to how we treat the planet and ourselves. And so the work that I've linked here, which is called thewholeworldview.org, comes from Jude Corriban's site, and she's just put out a really beautiful video of the world. And she's also done a fantastic reframing. She's taken the phrase we use so much called Big Bang, and she describes it as a big breath. And I love that. I recommend her work so wholeheartedly. And that idea that when we can see our planet as a living being and ourselves in relationship with it, and love at the centre. So that's why Kayleigh couldn't do that slide. Okay, I'll hand back to Kayleigh now. Thank you, Alex.
Suzanne, yeah, that kind of thing you do so much more kind of beautifully than I ever could. So thank you. So we wanted to just share a little bit of some health and care kind of wording and recognition of the principles. And I think when we started writing the book, I think we all kind of worried a little bit around health and care. We pick things up and we run with them, and we pick the bits that really make sense to us, and we go with it. And sometimes we leave the theoretical side of things behind a little bit in our need to kind of act and get things done. And I think we initially worried about how we would evidence the principles of appreciative inquiry within health and care work. And it turns out we didn't need to worry about it at all, because there's evidence of the principles all over the place. It's just kind of looking for them. But there was a really incredible article, and I think Suzanne carries this article around with her everywhere she goes now, that came out kind of right in the kind of back end of COVID, from a number of people working in a maternity service in the UK. So you can see the link to the article there if you want to read it in more detail. But they really beautifully pulled out some examples of the principles in action in their settings. So we just wanted to share those a little bit for you. So the idea around the constructionist principle is, there was an interview that had to be delivered over different days due to kind of acuity in the unit, so they needed to stop the interview and restart. And the person recapping the interview used the term burnout and stress when recapping, and that completely flipped the conversation from what had the previous day been a really kind of joy-filled interview to a negatively focused one. And it's just a really powerful example of that, the power of the words that we use and how important it is that we choose them really, really carefully. So that's just a really kind of nice example of that from that paper. I was trying to move the slides on and then suddenly remembered I'm not in charge of the slides. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm not used to not being in control. So then this is the kind of simultaneity principle. So during an interview, there was a midwife that mentioned an experience that they had supporting a specific group of women. And she later reflected on that and realised that had given her the space to really identify a passion that she had for that area of work. So she moved to take some steps to specialise in that very specific area. So the inquiry, the interview had created the change in her simultaneously. So that's a really kind of lovely example of that. And the anticipatory principle, the colleague that was interviewed had said that she was having some issues with her work environment, her colleague, and was challenged with a really appreciative question to imagine how she would like work to look. And that helped her to completely shift her mindset, moved her from being the victim in the situation and helped her to think about how she could become a part of the solution. Kind of realised that it was in her power to do something different in that situation. So I think that's really powerful as well. Can I get the next slide, please? So then we've got the example of the positive principle, and what we find in health and care, and I can't comment whether it's the same in other settings because I don't work in those other settings, but what we find in health and care is that when we first start asking really positively framed questions, it really sets people on edge a little bit. People panic a little, and we're not used to it in health and care. But actually, when we get under the skin of it and when people really start to respond well to that, we hear beautiful stories about people's success at work, their values, what led them into what they're doing. And in this instance, the participant shared that those positive questions had made her remember how happy she was in her work. She'd been going through a kind of really unsettled period, but it reminded her just how much she loved what she did for a living. And then finally, that poetic principle is exactly the reason that this team decided to use AI to shape their research. They wanted to look at the kind of elements that were working really beautifully, and they wanted to build that up rather than tear staff down. So creating that space for the poetic principle there. I think I'm handing back to Dan now.
Yep. Next slide, please. So I just want to focus on some of the tools. Obviously, these will be familiar to all of you, hopefully, on the call. Might be less so the one on the bottom left of the slide, which was Eric Hornigal's work in 2015 that sort of focused our attention to unwanted outcomes. And in healthcare, especially a little bit in social care, we've tended to focus 90% of our energy on these unwanted outcomes. So 10% of the time we know in healthcare things go wrong, but actually it feels like we use 90% of our lens and energy in that space to understand why it went wrong. Actually, what we then miss is all those positive surprises, but equally all of the planned outcomes, learning from the mundane and the ordinary and how you make the ordinary extraordinary. So we miss out on all of that by only focusing that narrowed attention to those unwanted outcomes. So this is a model that's really shifting our thinking in healthcare, and this is really predominant use in the book, and it lends itself nicely to that learning from excellence that Matthew talked about earlier. And actually, the positive surprises are the things that really go so well that we kind of didn't expect they would, but they do. How do we learn from them? How do we inquire into them? And obviously, using learning from excellence now is probably the biggest movement of an appreciative inquiry approach across health and social care. And now that's somewhat across the world in parts now. So that's brilliant. Actually, then what we see in, one of the key cornerstones of appreciative inquiry has been the 5D model. But actually, what we tend to use that now is with quality improvement. So we have something called the model for improvement, which is a plan, do, study, act cycle in one part of that takes us through improvement. What we start to glean by using the 5Ds is a whole sense of an appreciative improvement, really moving our thinking on in terms of improvement space. And then actually in the bottom right corner, what we see is that the SOAR has been one of the most fundamental tools for use in the NHS and in social care. The SOAR has really landed. And actually, when we talk about, working with, people who are new to appreciative inquiry, or they kind of are doing something, but they just don't know that it's appreciative inquiry. Actually introducing the SOAR has been really helpful. So lots of our strategies, it's now used on national forums and national meetings. So I was on a meeting on Tuesday and we did a SOAR as a national team. How brilliant, actually, that we soared in a meeting, where at once we would have probably sat there and looked at a dashboard and we'd have probably picked out the red areas of that dashboard. Whereas now we're starting to soar in a different way. And I think what's really especially important for health and social care is appreciative resilience, because actually we know that the level of burnout, we know the level of stress, we know the level of pressure within the system actually can cause us to look through that sort of cycle of despair. So actually then it becomes all about jobs in health and care to look at how we forgive that actually the system is so pressured, that we might need to reconnect parts of the system and get out to our public, about what are the pathways they can go through so that we deliver hope, actually, that we get a much more productive system through use of appreciative inquiry, but nurturing the resilience within that. And I think that goes to Seligman's PERMA model here as a sort of positive psychology model about having that true sense of sort of positive emotion and engagement in our work, but really blending it to relationships and meaning, but then absolutely taking the time to celebrate that sense of achievement. It's something that we miss so often, is that opportunity to celebrate work that is brilliant. And I think somebody said, how do we shine the spotlight onto those bright spots? So if we have the next slide, please. What I just wanted to come to on this one is our case study contributions. So we all started this journey and we said, actually, we really want to learn and hear the stories about how appreciative inquiry is being used in healthcare. And a lot of us actually probably left our appreciative inquiry lens a little while and said, oh, we don't know what's going to come back here. We don't know how much there will be. And actually, we were considerably overwhelmed. We had 23 comprehensive case studies, and they were all comprehensive in their own right. And actually, when we started to look at them, we could start to theme them, actually. And we themed them into 8 areas. And those 8 areas you can see on the slide. And actually, I think, again, they transcend across not just health and social care, but in all aspects of, professional life, actually, or any opportunity of work. How we come together, what relationships we have, our own well-being. We can use these as individuals. So we glean a sense from those case studies about, from the real brilliant bright spots of doing transformational change to those that are really quite new and junior to appreciative inquiry, but are doing something brilliant in their own right. So let's not distinguish between the two. Let's celebrate them all. So then we said, well, we have to put them all in because it would be a shame not to. And that's where we came to the supplement. And you'll see then that there's 16 in the sort of main text, and then there's another 7 that are referenced, and we'll go through those a little bit later. I know Kylie's had to drop off, but next slide, please. So the prize project was one of the case studies as part of that. And this sort of stems from learning from excellence. In the trust, sepsis identification and recognition wasn't, brilliant. There were lots of incidents, and it was probably those unwanted outcomes that we were focusing too much on, actually. So what happened was that an anaesthetist that started learning from excellence started to say, actually, how about we raise our learning from excellence every time that we follow the pathway and go above and beyond? So we start to make our norm celebrated. We celebrate the ordinary. And I think this is a classic example of how in healthcare we can absolutely study the ordinary, because this is what was meant to be ordinary, but it wasn't. It wasn't happening. We weren't following the pathway through, and actually the recognition was delayed treatment as a result or an outcome. So we couldn't call it ordinary, but what we wanted to do was make sure it became our ordinary. And you shine the spotlight and you make it extraordinary. And then what we found was actually that so many of the learning from excellences went in about sepsis that we termed it the prize project, that you prize for where it is now working, and you study it. And that was the important part, that you study what happens with that. So there was a whole set of research around when antibiotics are given, the timeliness of pushing fluids and oxygen therapy, etc. But that all come from the use of the 5D model. And it's a really nice case study to show actually how staff members, after they've done this practice, were sort of encouraged to have a conversation. So we learn from that and spread it across the whole trust. And that's exactly what happened in that case study. A brilliant start of what has become something now international.
Also, I have to say that the idea that we could call a project that's focusing on sepsis and that they could call it praise. If you wanted the power of appreciative inquiry, there's a good example.
Absolutely. Reframing in the moment is very important in healthcare, because we come out with some of these such terms that make us all cringe, and actually we just need to reframe them and absolutely look for the better conversation rather than using some of these terms. Next slide, please. So another case study was about networks, actually. And I think, Suzanne, was this one that you worked closer with, actually?
Yeah, this was Chris Jackson. And I don't think we'll go through the whole slide, but it was to say that he used Appreciative Inquiry to re-energize this network and particularly to help it get through COVID. So he used it routinely, really, in the ways in which he invited people to participate and join in on the network. You can read more about it on the slide or in the book. We'll go to the next one. And also with this one, this came from Amanda Gray, who was the manager of a big set of GP practices that merged together. And for her, this all also happened early on in COVID. So that she was able to use SOAR to help them get through this really difficult process of merging the different organizations and managing the changes that were coming through COVID. And I think you can all imagine the pressures that GPs were under at that time, especially.
Just reinforce the thing that Dan was saying and Suzanne about the SOAR tool, because I think what I realized when is the sheer, historically SOAR has been used as a strategic planning tool. That's its root. But in this book and in the case studies, we were seeing such things as team meetings to changing operating procedures in a hospital. The sheer variety of its usage, from care homes to hospitals, GP practices, was actually remarkable, because I was really surprised at some of the, even down to, we have developed it with nursing staff in Nottingham, but we have a SOAR based on well-being, individual staff well-being. So the sheer variety of its use is an incredible flexible tool.
And Matthew got caught with this example last time because she used appreciative journaling with her team. So they did collective journaling, which I thought was a very bold thing. What I really love is when people do something that they just create themselves on the spot. Next slide, please. So that's a list of the 7 case studies that are in the ebook, and these are written more as a story or as articles, so they're a slightly different kind of read than is in the book. And there's also a few other things in that supplement as well about appreciative inquiry. Some posters from Learning from Excellence are in that book as well, so there's a bit of colour in it. And I think, noticing the time, let's just go quickly through the last 2 slides, and it'd be really nice to hear if anybody has any comments or questions. I think this one, we know this, that's why we're here, but I just love the image, the power of noticing the good things at work and at home. And the next one, thanks, Alex. And this is another one which I love because it got created by someone on one of our courses. We told her about SOAR. She went home that night and she just created this. And it's got such an uplifting feel to how because of the imagery she put on, and it's a personal development SOAR. So that feeling of being lifted up by the eagle that's soaring.
And I think the other thing with that is, in the book, I noticed as I was preparing for this session, how much we'd used the poetic principle in terms of the art forms, that the drawings we use, the images, the Sonia Sparkle's work, all this really, to me, demonstrate. And the one thing is, in all our work from Appreciating People and all our books, we have concentrated on using imagery throughout the whole thing. And I think it's that, to me, that's one of the best ones, because someone literally took it away overnight or did something different with it.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Gray King was the artist who did all the other images that are in the book that are sort of scattered throughout the book. They're all her work. Okay, I think that's enough, isn't it? Just to give you a little bit of a flavour, I'd love to hear if any of you have any comments or questions. Thank you, Alex.
I've got a couple of questions. I think they relate to things that have come up. Like, one of them is like productivity. The official line in the health services, we've got 200,000 more people, but productivity has not changed or something. I think that's the official line or something. And I just wondered, I don't know whether there's been research on the effect of AI interventions on productivity or anything that I know it makes it rather dry and boring, but I just wondered if there's anything you can say to the people that are going, oh, look, we're stuck. We keep adding more staff to the NHS and it doesn't change productivity. I don't know if there's anything you can take away from AI that would feed, might be gratefully received by the people saying that. And I had another question, more tangential in a way, but I heard another very, very senior NHS England figure who I think he's the clinical lead for quality improvement or something like that. So I think you were talking about Aidan Fowler, were you, Daniel? Yeah, this is Amar Shah. But anyway, very, very senior in NHS England. And he said something very interesting a couple of weeks ago again. And he was saying the biggest mindset shift the NHS needs, which this came as a bit of a surprise to me. He said it's a shift kind of from the heroic problem-solving type leader who moves up the hierarchy and is brilliant because they solve all problems. He says that's totally the wrong mindset. It's not what's needed. What's needed is the sort of, I think he called it the kind of architect type leader that finds a way that the staff can solve the problem for themselves. That is a problem framer rather than a problem solver. And I was just intrigued in a general way about how appreciative inquiry might fit. I don't think he has any idea how to do it. I don't know. I didn't speak to him, but I've got a feeling he knows that's the problem. I'm not sure if he really knows what the solution is or anything like that. And I just wondered how appreciative inquiry might feed into that problem framing, architecting, something that enables staff collaboratively to do. I mean, I know it's of that ilk, but someone might have some further thoughts on what, if I run into Amar Shah, what do I say to him about appreciative inquiry? I suppose is a subtext of the question.
I guess I'm going to come to the second question first, if I can, Matthew. And I'd say that actually what he needs to be saying is that we need a mindset shift from being experts to explorers.
Yeah.
That slide from Adam Grant absolutely sums up some of the work that we need to be doing. We need to be talking about much more about collaboration. And shared decision making, so that actually NHS leaders come together. And instead of a chief exec of an NHS acute trust making a decision in silo, that all of the chief execs come together, whether that be social care, local authority, the acute trust, the ambulance trust, and they sit together and they understand actually what is possible here. So I think there's, we try to look for decision making and solutioning in the moment, and I don't think we should. That's not the particular improvement route. Actually, we kind of need to use our own improvement methodology a little bit more, and we need to test, and we need to be brave enough to be curious and to say, actually, we might not know everything at this point, but what is it that we're all collectively searching for, and what do our patients and our staff say and feel about this? Because I equally think, in the search of one's meaning, whether that be the question of how the NHS is productive or not, actually, I think, and it goes to what Viktor Frankl said about appreciative inquiry, actually, in positive psychology, that when he was in, Viktor Frankl spent 10 years in concentration camps. Would be quite easy, to focus on everything bad in that time. Instead, what he did was he wrote a book after the camps talking about man's search for meaning. And I absolutely think this is what we need to do a little bit more of. So he spent time in the camps. At the same time every day, he would think about his wife and what she was doing, but he framed it in a way that she was doing something positive. He dreamed. That's the use of the dream in the 5D model. He equally would go around the camp and he saw flowers growing in the camp, and that gave him life because it was something positive. So I kind of think we need the space for leaders to come together and to be, curiously brave, to have some of those improvement initiatives or those conversations where we don't have all the answers, but we go and ask people and we talk to people and we have a whole set of conversations and we engage with people in a different way and we connect. And then actually we're much more informed and we have greater insight when we've had those conversations to then make sensible decisions that probably lend themselves to your first question about productivity. Because actually, there's something here for me, and I've just spent 2 days at an NHS leaders conference with all CMOs and so chief medical and chief nursing and chief execs of all 42 of our integrated care systems in one place. The energy in the room over the last 2 days, and people actually admitting we don't have the answers. We're challenged on one hand around metrics of 4-hour I&E targets and ambulance handovers, etc. And we're challenged around the finances. What I've heard so many times during this conference is the word curious. And actually, to hear in a conference of some of the top leaders across our country coming together and saying, actually, what we're doing is taking a decision that benefits our place, our neighbourhoods, our population. So I think it's not setting our metrics around performance of a system. It's looking at what's the metrics we need at place in our neighbourhoods. What does that look like, actually? That's going to be really brave to do, because the government must still want its productivity, but it's productivity versus improvement and connection. And I think it's kind of doing it in a really different way. We have to kind of reset. Dars has given us that challenge to reset, and he's asked us to connect in a different way. And I mean, what I've heard at this sort of conference in terms of the government's want for the next few years, that if we want the 10-year plan that we know is going to come out. So they talk about this move from hospital to community, the move from analog to digital, and the move from sickness to prevention. But if we take the third one first, prevention absolutely is an asset-based, because it's looking at how we keep people well at its heart. It's what I said earlier around my title of deterioration. How do we work with people in a space that they want to be in, put a team around that individual to nurture them and help them grow, to keep them in that space? Because nobody frail and old wants to sit on the back of an ambulance or an I&E for 20, 30 hours. They are quite happy to have the care in their own home. So we need to be really, really brave to do that, actually, to reset some of those things, and it will take, acute hospitals. The fear might be there that, oh my gosh, if we're moving to community, what does that mean for our budget and our finances? But actually, is it that we could move some of that resource into a space of prevention and proactive care? And I think proactive care is appreciative inquiry at its heart, if I'm honest. And it's really nice that we're talking a lot about proactive care now. So that would be my response, Suzanne. Tim,
Yeah, you're gone.
I think just to go back to the first question, Matthew, is I tend to, my AI practice, also draw from outside the AI world. And one of the areas I draw from is Marquette's work on Turn the Ship Around, where he doesn't talk about empowering his staff or his crew. He talks about emancipating them, which is giving them freedom to make the decisions. And I think that's the most radical thing. We talk about empowerment. We actually are still controlling it if we're empowering staff. If we're emancipating them, they make the call. They make the decision. And our job as bosses in that situation is actually to hold the frame for them. So they can make a mistake, but they're still, as they're learning, or in my job outside of this world, is I don't care if my staff make a mistake. Are they learning is my question. Are they learning?
The one thing that I would just offer, Matthew, is that if Amar Shah asks you that question in future, tell him to get in touch and we'll give him a copy of the book.
There is something, because Appreciative Inquiry is really saying everybody has wisdom. So you don't need managers to be problem solvers. You need managers to be fully cognizant of the wisdom their staff have and how do they get that into the room and into the mix. And there was a couple of lovely references at an LFE conference a while ago where they said that when they were using learning from excellence or appreciative reporting, they needed fewer locums, staff retention was better, and so was well-being. But that was an off-the-cuff comment in a conference. I don't know how, to find more data, I'm not sure. Alex, what the time? I'm just thinking.
Yes,
We ought
we're
to run a
coming
bit.
to...
You unmuted, Teresa. Did you want to ask something?
Actually, I wanted to add something.
Okay.
I can't answer the question in terms of research. What I can answer the question in terms of my experience. One is that anytime you're working solely on a problem or solving a problem, you may in fact narrow your focus and eliminate solutions. So I see appreciative inquiry as strength-based. So you're looking for what works in the narrative of the people it works with. So anytime you have a conversation with say, a certified nursing assistant, if you bring forward and invite the story of when they serve people and what it meant to the person they served and what it means to them, they begin to weave a narrative of understanding their meaning and purpose. They also begin to build on what's best. So in my particular approach, and I am singularly saying it's mine, the problems are irrelevant to me. It's what works that will move us to even greater solutions, ideas, and creativity. So our focus as an organization is strength-based. It's miravita.com is our website. It's in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Oshkosh is a little city, and we're a global headquarters for several conversations on strength-based aging. So I invite the folks that are thinking about continuing to nibble away at the problems to discard them and to have a whole approach of what builds from what we know today, as you said, the wisdom of who's present, into the successes yet to be imagined. So thank you for this morning. For me, it was a revisit to principles I know well and use often. It was an insight of encouragement that in England, there's a shift in thought. So for those of you that are influencing that shift, congratulations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We are at the end of our time. Susan or Tim or Daniel, do you want to say a few last few words?
I think Teresa just said it best, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with your concluding comments. They were lovely. Thank you, Teresa.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for hosting today and for sharing these amazing stories. The recording will be available in our library, and that's open to anyone. So feel free to share it and encourage people to come and watch the recording, but also to continue the conversation. It's an online platform, and really you can share resources, ask questions, and stay in touch with each other so that it doesn't end right here. So once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely day or lovely evening. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.